Rium.
Nearly a decade. I'd just like to point that out. So hi, this is basically a copy of a presentation that I did 2 years ago in 2012 for Mysterium, then on my Myst book. So if you've seen it then, I'm sorry it's a bit of a repeat. I was asked to do this again 2 days ago, so this is kind of a bit of a rush and I didn't have time to get stuff ready again. So grab the old slides, grab the old notes, whatever else, get it going again. But yes, I made a Myst book, and this is the work that went into it. A lot of people have no idea just how much work went into this. If you saw it online, you saw the price of it was tagged as $15,625 for sale if someone wanted it. It's not that I was seriously selling it. That's number one, it's because it's 1,000 and many numbers, but it's actually, that's a serious representation of just how much time went into it when you consider minimum wage, and if you consider the cost of the actual materials went into it. That's actually about the right figure, and most people aren't aware just how much work went into it. So, this kind of explains everything on it. My notes. Okay, next slide. So, me. Hi. I'm Mike Ando. I'm a crazy time-traveling mad scientist from Australia. Kind of not joking at this point because I actually drive a DeLorean. I imported it myself. I have a weapons-grade lightsaber laser that does actually cut, burn through things. And I do all sorts of other weird stuff like that. So the name is just kind of actually stuck because of TQ sending it to apply. You probably don't know us here, but in Australia at least, I was on Beauty and the Geek Australia last year, like November, December, where they made me wear all sorts of crazy things and act like a the show is still popular in Australia. It's actually the #1 ranking show in Australia when it's airing. So it's disturbing to think that 1 in 9 people in Australia saw me wearing gigantic underwear getting crabs. So, that's new stuff that I do. I have a habit with everything else in my life of turning things up to 11. I have this common saying, it doesn't matter what you do, if you turn it up to 11, it's cool. It doesn't matter how niche or how geeky or dorky, if you turn it up to 11, it's cool. And it's like driving a DeLorean is an actual car every day that I go to the groceries to pick up milk. So this time I thought I'll turn this one up to 25 by going to the next one. Something missed. So some of my other projects that I made in the past was I made a 25-hour clock that actually does tick in proper Dunny time. That was a crazy, crazy thing that took me 11 years to get that working. It's all mechanically sound, it all actually works, it does tick and everything, and that's a topic for another talk that I've done another time. There's the Riven Journals Restored, which was an antique game for online for Riven way back in Internet Explorer 4 days, so it's a kind of antique, but it was well and truly ahead of its time. It's currently broken, I'm sorry, I've been too busy with everything to get it back offline. There's problems because it was coded in PHP 2 and we're now at PHP 5 and converting between. Yeah, I'm sorry, I will get it working again soon. And there's also some Riven Dagger keyrings, just one of the main things that I'm known for in the community. I still have one of these left, and it's probably going to be in the raffle for Mysterium attendees. You'll see it on the table there. I have one of these left. It's number 25 of 25. I have no more. That is the absolute last one I'll ever see. So some lucky person will get that keyring. Next slide. Big question that people often ask me is, why build a Myst book? This, at the time when I did this, finished this project in 2 years ago, this was, like a 19-year-old game, there's a prop from it. Why bother with that? It's a common question that I come to get from non-fans, especially people that are not gamers or they only play casual gamers. If you're not really used to obsessions of things, you wouldn't just quite get why to do this. So, next slide. There's basically 3 reasons why you would ever do this. Many people have actually tried to build a Myst book before. A lot of them actually are pretty good. The common way was just to grab a book and then put a printout on there and put their phone in it, or a portable picture frame, or even just a printout of the little screen. As technology advanced, things got more and more advanced. They thought that was a really great, but I thought I could do something just a little bit more accurate if I turn it up to 25. It's a huge challenge to get this all as accurate as I want. I basically set the bar as high as I physically could. See, how crazy can you go with this? And I need a challenge to always keep going in my life. And so I thought if I actually managed to get this working, it'd just be freaking awesome. So that's what I decided to do many years ago, and didn't realize how much effort it would be to actually do this, and I probably wouldn't have done it if I had known. Next slide. The biggest problem though is finding parts are hard because I want it to be proper. So my game goal that I set myself was it has to play the Myst games in the book as best as it possibly can. This is actually a lot more difficult than you think because everything has to be miniaturized and it has to be low power and everything has to fit in there. And it just starts becoming incredibly difficult to find anything that has ever physically been made that will actually physically do the entire job. You think a smartphone is great, but that actually runs on the ARM processors, not the x86 processors. And so you really cannot just run a standard game for it. You know, you've got to port it over. It has to be recompiled from code. And something like Exile, you can't exactly recompile the code from that because Cyan doesn't have the code, and I'm not Cyan, so I couldn't do it anyway if I was. Big questions about this is that it took me 6 years roughly to hunt down all of the components I need before I finally assembled it. Some of the components are just off-the-shelf stuff. Some of them are actually very high-end industrial or medical grade or almost aerospace grade components. Some of them are custom made for me. I had to use Google Translate to talk to some suppliers, and there was one supplier who I physically had to do a background check before they were interested in selling to me because they only deal in aerospace, medical and government clients. Then I physically had to get that part because there was nothing else that actually worked. Next slide. The big question that everyone often has is, what book is it? That is the one that everyone wants to know, and normally Cyan doesn't let you touch the book. Basically, when Cyan was making this book, that game they thought wouldn't be that common, they just grabbed a random off-the-shelf book, probably something just from a second-hand store that was cheap and looked really cool. So it was probably only a couple of bucks, if that. And they just grabbed it and they scanned it for use in the texture and for live-action filming, whatever else. But actually finding out a book, even if you have the identity, is actually rather difficult. And so the actual book itself, the reason why it has no value is it's essentially the equivalent of a Reader's Digest, but it's 137 years old. Now, you try finding a copy of Reader's Digest from 12 months ago. You just can't find that. So finding one that old is, almost impossible. Books like that are literally sold by the meter to interior designers just because of the look of their spines. They have absolutely no concept of value of actually the titles on them. The only really value is just for looks. Old books, people are, oh, books have value, old books are important. Yeah, like old textbooks aren't important, not all old books are valuable. This really has no value. The actual content of the books is snippet extracts of short stories and news articles that were printed in other items that were bound together as a compilation. So you can see, it doesn't actually have the original articles, it doesn't have complete articles, it really has very little value to the actual physical text, which makes it so hard to find. But what book actually is it? The book's actual identity, next slide. Harper's New Monthly Magazine, Volume 54, Issue 312, December 1876 to May 1877. You need all of that information if you're going to actually find the book because there's multiple different bindings. For instance, this was a compilation pack performed by people where they grabbed the local newspaper editions and then bound it locally. So my researchers found that there was at least 3 different companies in America that were performing this binding of the locally bound newspaper snippets. And they grabbed whatever random offcuts of the covers that they could to get it together. So there's 14 different covers of this one book. And you need the cover as the main thing that you're looking for. So finding that one is actually very, very difficult. There's a lot that are very, very close, so it's kind of a question of just how accurate you want. Even better, you can just pick one that's just one issue back or forth, and you'll get something, again, that's kind of close, but it's always a question of how accurate you want to be. I have to go all the way, as you do. Basically, some of the things as well, the only way to know is to examine very closely or to pull the book apart because Cyan's one has an lining on it and Cyan's one is actually physically falling apart, very poor condition. Now, the big question is how do you actually make people jealous with like a Myst book? I bought every single copy for 6 years that I could find. I did this because I needed the research to actually identify the books and tag them, and because I needed the parts to be able to use it to make everything. So I kind of kept the identity a secret for a while ago. It was only 2 years ago that I announced what the actual book's identity was. But I really needed the parts, and I didn't want to compete with everyone on eBay just trying to grab every single copy. So yeah, that was an interesting thing. I have quite a few of them spare now sitting around that I'm very close. I'll be selling them off soon when I get around to it. Yeah, so that's basically why I just need the exact correct book. So that's why I kind of had to hoard them for a bit. I'm sorry, but I'll be releasing them soon. Next slide. So the problem though is that any old book that you get that's 137 years old is going to be damaged. There is nothing you can do about this, especially if it's not been carefully looked after, and something that literally is newspaper snippets is not going to be looked after properly. So restoring the book starts getting very interesting. The cover on the actual book they used is a very low-grade cardboard. The actual paper inside is cheap newspaper print quality paper, not even the expensive newspaper print paper, with a cross-hatched fibre that actually cuts very poorly and tears and rips really easily. Cannot cut it straight. And my actual book that I managed to find, the spine was dried out and cracked, and it technically was still there, but it probably only had another 50 openings and closings until the entire front cover fell off. It looks good condition, but it wouldn't exactly open and close properly for long, and kind of need a functional book, so I decided we're just going to have to get this all restored. You know, original is great, but having it functional is kind of important. I can't just have it sit on the shelf. I want to be able to use it. Basically, the first thing I did was contacted the state museum that I have in my state to see who I could actually get the book restored with. Who do they use for their professional manuscripts for restoring antique documents? They recommended me straight to the president of the Australian Bookbinding Association for such a weird job because they just couldn't name absolutely anyone. So Mr. Ian Bates at Sage Old Books, thank you very much. You were very helpful and very understanding with my demands, because it turns out his wife was a closet Mist fan. So he was very happy to help me with this. We did a lot of work trying to match individual glues inside the book, so that the glues are very similar to the types that they used back then. He could clean up the copy, and he cut out the middle of it. He didn't cut out enough, but I really wish I had another millimeters or two, but yeah, it was what it was. Basically that's the end of it. So for instance, you can see the entire inside of the book was hollowed out like that. That went through different stages of revisions to hollow out the actual book. That one was one of the middle versions that had a cardboard in there, and I modified that because that was not enough space. I needed 2 millimeters more, and I just needed that, and there was no other way, so I had to reassemble everything again. Yes, this does mean I actually destroyed the book, but I'd like to think that at least I made something cooler, at least 20% cooler. So, other problems that you actually start running into when you start doing this, just to get the physical book. Next slide is, for instance, it has the word Myst on the front. Cyan doesn't know what font they use. They can't make up their own mind. Every font that they've used with the word Myst, basically in every game, is almost always a unique font. They don't think they keep records of what they're using. Why? Because here's some proof. If you look on the top left, that's the Myst game box. If you look on top right, that's the Myst logo used for online publications of the original version of Myst. This is not future ones. Middle left is the Myst CD. Middle right is the Myst in-game book. Bottom left is the Rium Myst original edition box. Bottom right is the Rium Myst in-game book. And if you start looking at it very closely, I don't know how well you can see here, but for instance, if you look at the serifs on the S, that some are curved, some are straight. Look at the shape of the T. Some are flat, some have a bit of an angle in them. The Y shape has different lengths of thickness in them. And this is just for original Myst. This does not take into account, for instance, this typing that they used in, for instance, like Revelation and Exile, which were made by different studios, so they may have different fonts. This doesn't take into account games that they made in the future, like Ooh or End of Ages, where there may have been a problem because old computers, new computers, the fonts may not have been transitioned over. This doesn't even take into account Riven, which was made straight after, which uses different fonts, and this doesn't take into account even Rium Myst Masterpiece, which also uses different fonts. There is no physical way to say what font the Myst font is, because Cyan has more than one. At the end of the day, there is nothing. So you can pick one that's close. And I'm the one who's designing this book. So what do? I take one of the original logos that they designed, and I need to emboss this on the front of the book. So the first top one is one of the original designs from the box art all cleared up. The middle is the outline that I did. Now this is going to be stamped and embossed into the actual book, so there's a bit of change that has to happen to the font, and at the end of the day, that's the one that I was happy and familiar with to call the actual font. That was a custom design one, that's not an actual physical font. And at the bottom you can see how it actually looks. Now, at the end of the reason why I had to do this as well through stamping is because each letter was actually made through a custom-made individual die for each letter that was stamped, and then embossed with 24 karat gold paint, not gold leaf, which tends to wear off with time, but gold paint has a better sheen to it. So yeah, 24 karat gold.